The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly Western Mass news and review from NEPM. I'm Jill Kaufman, in for Carrie Saldo. It is Friday, April 18th. Joining us this week is Mass Live reporter John Mysick, joins us by phone from Boston. In the studio, Mike Dobbs, longtime journalist, Focus Springfield host now of Government Matters, and a political consultant and a Beacon Hill knowledge base. Ryan McCullum is here. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Hi, John. We're going to talk in a bit about how some FEMA grants that have been cut by the federal government will impact infrastructure projects in Western Mass and beyond, and the impact on federal funding cuts to museums and libraries. That's everywhere, but again, we're focusing on Western Mass. Let's start first with the impact of these 10% tariffs. Policy on global goods and materials. This is the tariff from the Trump administration that was kept in place, at least for now. Over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of change. The tariffs from China, of course, are on goods from China, of course, are quite different. Well, you can talk about those as well. But this tariff is going to be on materials that manufacturers in Western Mass use, beer cans, custom injection molding, windshields, grain, so aluminum, resin, different components. I was back-channeling last night with Tony Signoli about some things that he knows regarding windshields, and that's out of the Eastman, which was Eastman Kodak at some point, and in Massachusetts there is in Springfield there's a factory here. HVAC companies, of course, CCRC in Springfield. These are making trains. Mm-hmm. We've got a lot of industry here in Western Mass. Mike Dobbs, you've been reporting on this for a long time. What about that impact on local industry or manufacturing? What could be happening with this 10% tariff?
I think the most ironic story that we're facing so far is the fact that CCRC, a Chinese-based company, is subject to tariffs. People know that they are manufacturing train cars for the MBTA. They're getting a lot of the material that they assemble in Springfield from China, and it doesn't make any difference. They've got to pay a tariff. How's that going to affect future business for them? You mentioned the vodka. This is V1 Vodka, which is a locally owned business, but they distill their vodka in Poland. It doesn't make any difference that they're distilling it for an American company.
Sure.
They're paying a tariff. I'm not being any sage about this. We're going to see in the next couple months more and more industries looking at raw materials or finished products that they import facing extreme increases, which is then going to result in what? More inflation, unemployment, layoffs? We don't really know at this point.
Ryan, can you talk a little bit, if you know, about a supply chain of materials,
Sure.
and beyond that as well? Another way to think about this, is there any opportunity in the U.S. and Massachusetts for new industry to create that supply chain?
Sure. I mean, the supply chain is a supply chain, and we're Americans, so sometimes we like items from outside of America. We appreciate a Polish vodka. We appreciate Greek olive oil, as pointed out in for Manny's olive oil. You can't replicate Greek olives in Massachusetts. So that's an issue. Will this give more opportunities for folks who maybe have an olive farm in Franklin County, if there is one? Yeah. But there are some items that you just can't replicate. And I think the other bigger piece is how this trickles down. So V1 Vodka, the prices go up. And so now if I wanted to open a bar, am I going to open a bar during this time when all the alcohol from outside of our country is now cost that much more? We're going to see a lot of bourbon bars opened up because that's, it's an American whiskey.
Right.
So that comes on to us. And this president seemingly got elected about inflation, right? And we're going to see some real inflation starting to happen.
John, I also just want to point out some of the reporting that was Jim Kinney did the story for The Republican about Manny's and about V1 vodka in Hadley and Manny's olive oil of Manny's appliances, which I love this merger of the worlds. John Misick, can you talk about Governor Healey's Massachusetts Tariff Responsive and Business Operations Support Initiative? That's a mouthful. She launched this initiative this week. You've been writing about this. What can she possibly be doing to help businesses respond to this 10% tariff?
Sure, Jill. Before we dive into that, I just want to add one Taylor to the conversation there. I was across the border in Quebec on Wednesday for a different story, and one of the things that Massachusetts gets from Canada is aluminum and hardwoods. The state has a housing crisis. It has a housing affordability crisis. It needs those materials to build new housing, whether that's multifamily housing or accessory dwelling units or new homes. And with the price of that going up, that further exacerbates the housing crisis here. And Canadian officials I was talking to on Wednesday are saying, well, rather than getting slapped with tariffs, we have our own housing crisis in Canada. We might just hold on to that stuff to help address homegrown problems. So there becomes another supply chain issue.
Right, and this is another a need in the U.S. of affordable housing in Massachusetts, and one of the biggest initiatives under the Healey administration as well. So, yeah, you played that out.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely right. But as far as Governor Healey's initiative goes, the front office announced something as billing as its Tariff Response and Business Operations Support Initiative, and because everything has to have an acronym, they're calling it TURBO, dropping the U from that. They're billing as a one-stop shop for business owners dealing with a rapidly shifting trade landscape. They're providing support services. They're trying to get a handle on what the state can do, if anything, to support businesses in Massachusetts that are being affected by these duties at the border. I mean, as a practical matter, there's not a lot because this is federal policy, but they can provide sort of educational service, support services, financial assistance if need be. But the state is just as much subject to these shifting winds as the business community. And the governor huddled with business leaders last week to discuss the breadth and scope of this. The governor described, quote, the chaos that's being brought on by the White House's trade duties, and they're doing what they can to get their arms around it as well.
So we can ask this question on almost anything that we're talking about today in this half an hour about pushback, lawsuits, attorneys general. We've been seeing this on other topics. What can be done, if anything, legally? If while the courts may respond, the administration, the president may not adhere. But anything that we can understand in the business manner, what states can do to push back on this because of its federal nature.
Well, Senator Warren, for instance, has introduced a resolution in the Senate that would rescind the emergency declaration the White House has used to impose these trade duties. I mean, if there's action that's going to play out, it's really going to be in Congress reasserting its legislative prerogatives. And, under Article 1, taxing powers and the power of the purse rests with Congress. Republican leadership on Capitol Hill so far has been loath to assert that authority, but, that's where this takes place.
Yeah, I saw Senator Warren on, I think it was CNBC, and she was basically doing a civics 101 to one of the reporters.
Right.
And saying, like,
we can use that.
He's not, we do. Our whole country needs it at this point. He's not a king, and the emergency order has allowed him to actually act like a monarch and do these things that are powers of the House and the Senate. And at some point, hopefully the Republicans agree and feel like what is their job if they're just going to allow him to do whatever he wants to do under a sham emergency order and charge tariffs to our allies. Like, how is that an emergency to tariff our allies?
Although I will always acquiesce to Ryan's political insider expertise, nonetheless, my opinion is until you have quote-unquote heartland American senators who are coming from sparsely populated, largely agricultural states, and when those farmers cannot sell their products overseas, then I think we'll see some real movement. Sure. And we're not far from that point. We are. Remember, China has already blocked American beef. They're buying beef now from Australia. Yeah. They're blocking soybeans. This is going to be a terrible blow to many states. I think they're getting their soybeans from Brazil. What they are proving is that they don't need our products if our products are too expensive. This is just not politics. This is simple business.
Sure.
We'll go to another supplier if we can't get these things. So I really think that the Republican senators, publicly, they may not admit this. Privately, they might. They're going to feel pain, and they're going to have to take some action, or their states are really going to suffer.
So just for a moment, and I want to move on to the next topic in a second, can we put a fine point on this about those tariffs impacting the economy of Western Massachusetts? And Ryan, you were talking about, what will bars and restaurants do?
Sure.
But there's so many products, there's so much manufacturing, and it's widgets, it's plastics being manufactured in Pittsfield, it's other industry in Springfield. What does 10% is that a lot? That's on the raw material coming in to make the widget, the windshield, the car.
It depends on your profit margin, but there's a lot of businesses. For instance, dairy farmers operate on a very, very slender margin. I just read a story in the Atlantic about a Vermont farmer who is a MAGA guy, but his feed bill came in from Canada. That's where he gets his feed. It was $2,300 more for that order. And he says, I don't know how to pass this along because milk prices are, of course, regulated to a certain degree. So if you're a farmer in Western Mass, if you're a dairy farmer, and there's plenty of them, this is a very real thing.
Yeah, I have a client who's a wholesale guy. He sells items to schools and to the MGM, and he ate the increase for a little bit, but now his suppliers are saying, we're going to have to figure this out. And he's shopping around, but you're looking around, and a lot of stuff is from China.
All right, we'll keep an eye on this. So also this week, the Trump administration canceled a set of grants that were distributed through FEMA. It was $90 million worth of grants around Massachusetts, infrastructure grants. 18 towns lost money. 3, I'd say, organizations. One is a regional commission. One is a couple of agencies as well. These are called BRIC grants, BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grants. So the money was to go toward preventing disasters that we have been experiencing in Western Mass, from flooding, from drought as well, but building resilience in culverts and floodplains, getting ready for the varied storms with what another administration has talked about is climate change. Along the coast where you are, John Misek, that's, flood protection in highly populated areas in Western Mass. And, as the Berkshire Eagle reported, it's a backup generator for the public safety complex in Hinsdale, a really small town with a really great need. That was $81,000. So, Ryan, with this, some FEMA money, with the federal government backing out, who is going to foot the bill? What can we say about that? Whether is the state able to step up? Towns are really struggling already with their budgets.
Towns are struggling. I'm a Long Meadow guy, and people sometimes would think that Long Meadow doesn't need anything, but we do. and we're one of those towns that got a cut. They got a $75,000 cut, and we pay the highest tax percentage.
I don't mean to put you on the
state.
spot, but what was the cut? Do you know what the cut was for?
It was to building code updates. So I'd have to dig in more to see exactly what it is. But we do have a watershed. We're on the Connecticut River. It could be down there where our dump is. But anyways, it's really going to impact local towns. And the governor in her release, she said she's going to try to do something about it. I think it's part of this whole plan to kind of back it way up. Is anything that seems liberal or progressive, Trump is the tip of the spear to kill it. And this is climate change stuff. And they don't even believe in climate change, but this is stuff that we need because of climate change.
John Misek, Beacon Hill area. We heard the governor speak out very clearly this week about the, quote, the Trump administration suddenly ripping the rug out from under cities and towns that were promised funding, to help them upgrade those roads and bridges, also to build green spaces. What else are you hearing from legislators or from the governor herself about mitigating risk, preventing future disasters?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, Jill, the governor has been really clear about is the state doesn't have the money to backfill this on its own. I mean, we're talking about, the totality of federal funding, something in the neighborhood of $16 billion that comes into the state every year. And we're seeing sort of a death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts here, a little bit taken from here, a little bit taken from there. We'll add just to my friend Ryan, there is a small amount of backstopping, a $250 million resiliency fund that was inserted into last year's state's budget, sponsored by Senator Joanne Comerford of Northampton County. $250 million, it's not a small chunk of change, but sort of given the totality of the state's needs, we all saw what happened in Leominster, we saw what happened in Springfield with the flooding. That really punched a hole in local infrastructure. So when you pull out the rug on $90 million in disaster prevention, you're talking about, seriously undermining efforts to protect local communities. And the governor has talked about this more than once, what she's seen as sort of as an unprecedented attack from Washington on core state services, from schools to roads to climate change and public health services. It's been a lot for the state to absorb all at once.
All right, we're going to take a really quick break. We're going to keep talking about this when we return with Ryan McCollum, Mike Dobbs, John Misick. You're listening to The Rundown. I'm Jill Kaufman. This is 88.5 NEPM. This is The Rundown. I'm Jill Kaufman, in for Carrie Saldo today. We have been talking about many things, many cuts. The Trump administration canceled a set of grants distributed through FEMA, and the impact on Massachusetts will be felt. We're going to talk a few minutes from now about museums and libraries and funding cuts there from the Trump administration in terms of grants. I have a question for you, Mike Dobbs, to consider the economical impact on towns not being ready for, or potentially not ready, and parts of those towns not ready for the weather to come. I've been reporting on Belchertown and other small, more rural towns even, who are struggling with their tax base. That's to fund schools and public safety. So if infrastructure isn't ready, are businesses going to be coming to these towns, in Western Massachusetts? Will they be opening their new industry or their store if the bridges are outdated or their culverts aren't widened enough or repaired enough? Is this going to hit the economy of these towns even more? Is that a trickle down? Well,
of course it will, because it's an open secret that doing business in Massachusetts can be expensive. Okay, so and in fact, I saw a stat about 58,000 people leaving Massachusetts last year, and it was because of the cost of business and the cost of housing and the cost of living. Now, the bottom line is that this is just a line of dominoes, and if you recognize a problem in your community that would help maybe take a domino out of that line, then you want to do that. And if it involves like flooding issues or bridge safety or something like that, these are not sexy sort of artificial issues. These are real everyday issues, and it says something about the Trump administration that they do not want to recognize the fact that we're in a situation where the climate is not something that we can rely on any longer in behaving a certain way. Just remember the story, was it from last summer? All the farmers up in the Hatfield area were washed out. Their crops were destroyed by rain and flooding. I mean, this is a new normal. So instead of the federal government taking a lead on this, the federal government is saying, hey, states, it's up to you to figure this out.
Yes, and we saw this in Hatfield, in East Hampton, in Williamsburg. A lot of damage done both to crops, but also to just little bridges that connect one street to another in a town.
Our infrastructure is so old.
Yes, this is Massachusetts.
Yes, we do.
John Misick, I'm going to move on to the next topic, unless you have something else you want to add to this conversation about type of FEMA grants being cut and what that means to Western Mass and what that means to Boston.
No, I mean, other than to say that, the governor has recognized the age and the state of the condition, of the state's infrastructure, and has proposed $8 billion in funding over 10 years to address a lot of that, some of it MBTA, regional transit, but a lot of it sort of road and bridge construction to fix the stuff that people travel over every day. The question becomes, of course, if the state loses a big chunk of federal funding, what becomes of that very necessary repair work.
That's Mass Life political editor John Misick. Also in the studio is political consultant Ryan McCollum, reporter Mike Dobbs of Focus Springfield. I'm Jill Kaufman. You heard what we've been talking about: cuts that are coming down from the Trump administration in terms of grants. Right now, we're going to talk about libraries and museums, another topic pertaining to efforts for the Trump administration, as it says, to save money or to eliminate programs that don't align with the priorities of the president. The Trump administration has pretty much shut down a relatively small federal agency that has been providing funding to libraries and museums nationwide, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the IMLS. NEPM's Philip Bishop, who is engineering our show today, has been reporting on the library side of these cuts. And this week we started to hear about museums like the Homestead of Emily Dickinson or the Pecumtuck Valley Memorial Association, who've lost grants. John, from your side in Boston, what can you say about this cancellation as part of a broader shift, maybe in federal funding priorities for cultural institutions?
So let's bottom line it first. The state gets $3.6 million in federal funding. That comes from the IMLS, it's channeled through the Massachusetts Board of Libraries.
That is just for museums, libraries, just to clarify that.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
That's correct. Yes. I mean, that's that fund. I mean, it's not insignificant. So, it is, again, part of this broader shift in priorities. The White House trying to bring institutions across government in line with its ideological and political priorities. And probably spent a whole show about what happened with Harvard this week, just for instance. But, I can say that this is one of the multitude of legal actions that Attorney General Andrea J. Campbell has taken. She took the administration to court earlier this month to try to stop it from dismantling this funding stream. And again, the Attorney General, we've talked a bit about what the governor can do. We haven't talked a lot about what Andrea Campbell can do, and that's been to sue the pants off the White House, which she has been doing pretty well from day one. And attorneys general across the nation have won some legal victories against the White House, blocking some of its executive action. So this could be another one that the Attorney General adds to her pile. But I mean, that's, again, we can talk about that, but that's one of these areas where this battle is also being fought.
Right. So I want to lay out that some of these grants are multi-year grants, so organizations have already been in process of using the money. They are not being told they have to return money they use necessarily. There also is, you could also petition the termination, whether, that goes through, that's separately, that's on your own as a museum or an organization. So, it's and this is only partial funding, but it could be significant to a small organization that has no money to update its archives digitally, for instance. Ryan and Mike, can you talk, and John, can you talk a little bit about how these funding cuts will, could impact the preservation of culture and history and the narratives, not just the objects?
Yeah, I think again, I said it earlier, the Trump administration is attacking all things they think is progressive, right? But
historical too.
Yeah, but historical, like bringing up history and being woke or having understanding of what history has happened is part of what they see as being progressive, right? And so, yes, there's people who aren't progressive who use libraries and museums, but as a whole, that's where and John made a good point by saying it's a political restructuring of their priorities, and they don't find libraries and museums to be priorities, and that is that's going to hurt children. It's going to hurt everybody as far as the archives you were talking about, or preserving culture and history in these places, and I think that's what their goal is.
It's ultimately, what kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to actually be the United States of America? And what Trump's administration has been doing by this whole removal of DEI, insert air quotes here, folks, now saying, okay, we're not going to fund libraries and museums. All I can do, being a big movie guy, is thinking, have you guys seen the movie Idiocracy? Okay, by Mike Judge? You should watch it, because it's a time travel movie, and it indicates what kind of country we have in the future when we don't have education, when we don't have institutions to reflect the vibrant and wide culture of the United States. I mean, that's what we're heading to. You know, instead of having a president who is appreciative of what's going on at the Candy Center, no, he wipes all that out. He says, we're going to get some real entertainment in here. And then he goes to mixed martial arts fighting. Nothing against mixed martial arts, but you know what? This isn't the United States that certainly this old man grew up in.
And there's an economic development aspect to this, right?
Of course.
And so these museums and libraries are visited from all over, right? And so if you don't have the same, you can't do that one exhibit, or you can't do this or that, that's going to attract folks to the Quadrangle in Springfield, or to Hartford, to the Harriet Beecher Stowe, or whatever it is, you lose some economic development aspect too. So it's not just having this as a culture, it's losing some economic development
Right.
as well.
I want to say there is not yet that I've found that is a composite list of which grants were cut. We have more calls out. We spoke to Mass Humanities yesterday. They are connecting us to the New England Museum. The New England Museum Association, who we'll talk to after the show, and we'll get some reporting out on that. But we do know that the entire staff of the IMLS was either temporarily or permanently cut. We do know, and I'm very careful to say these things as a reporter, that it was the federal administration that posted on social media on the page of the IMLS, that's Museum and Library Services, that the grants were going toward woke projects. So, we do understand there is a cultural shift going on. I wonder if you could talk a little bit, any of our guests, about how private foundations might be able to step up. Is there enough money to fund the arts in a certain way? And again, these are partial budgets. But where will private foundations fall in this? It's playing out across sectors right now that private money is stepping up. Can you talk about the arts a bit, in Western Mass at least, in terms of who we know is out here, what they're doing?
Well, I mean, I have a new client, Bob Bulldog, who just bought City Stage and has dumped millions into City Stage to make it an arts hub, mainly for Springfield youth, but he's kind of an art center there. And so philanthropists and foundations and those folks are going to have to step up. What else I've noticed and I've heard is folks they're going to focus on what they're going to focus on. I heard of another very wealthy benefactor who happens to be in the LGBTQA plus community, who used to give money to other things, and now he's like, I have to focus on my community. So money's not necessarily going to dry up per se, but it might get focused in certain areas, and hopefully there's some benefactors in the arts, library, cultural institution, places that can step up.
John Misick, we have about a minute or so left. Mike Dobbs as well. Anything you want to add to that about what you're hearing about private foundations, individuals stepping into the arts world, knowing what's to come?
I just think that everyone's going to be going to the same well. That's the problem. We're all going to go to the same well, and there's only so much money these foundations and individuals have, and I applaud them for fighting the good fight, but it's going to be tougher, in my opinion.
John Misick?
I would have to concur. I mean, philanthropy has always played a significant role in the arts, but if you have more people competing for the same pot of money, there's ultimately less that goes around. The state finds itself in the same place with its federal funding dilemmas. We talked earlier in the program about organizations that operate on the slenderest of margins, and certainly these small museums and these smaller arts organizations, the disappearance of even $10,000 or $15,000 in funding can mean the difference in cutting back services or furloughing staff or whatever. So it's it's 3.6 million spread across multiple institutions in the state. Maybe doesn't sound a lot, but there are profound sort of ground level impacts for these organizations.
Right, and there is a significant amount of money still around. I just want to point that out. Yet yesterday, Mass Humanities announced that they got notification they lost a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. That is also significant, but they are leaning on the Barr Foundation. They are leaning on Mass Cultural Council, which is the state. We're going to talk more about this ongoing. Thank you so much for coming in, Ryan McClellan. Mike Dobbs, John Misick, thank you for being on the line as well. The rundown in Anthem is by the Love Crumbs. Our director is Tony Dunn. Our board op is Kara Foster, Phil Bishop, engineers Betsy Lanko, Bart Rankin, Dave Sears, Chuck Dubé. We had production support and digital from Ayu Suryawan. I'm Jill Kaufman, in for Carrie Salda, who will be back next week, we believe. You've been listening to The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM.